Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Energy Officer Show. I'm your host, Graham Parr, with my co-host, Graham Betchart, who's on the road traveling, being a maverick. How are you, Graham?
I'm doing great. Just on the road, driving back from Sacramento as the mental performance coach for the Kings. But it's great to be here. We're gonna have a great show. John, how you doing, man? Our other co-host.
Oh, great. Great to be here. Grateful.
Well, here's how this show works. John's gonna give us a topic of the day here in about 20 seconds, and then we're gonna roll. We're gonna work through, and we're gonna go through the Max Conscious principles and work through how to deal with this pressure that John's about to hit us with. And this show is dedicated to police officers. We are here for you. Our goal is to give you quality mental skills to help you perform at a high level and create that connection between the community and police officers. So we're grateful to be here. John, Grant, I'm grateful you're here. John, why don't you get us started and let us know what our topic of the day is?
All right. So today's pressure point, we're going to talk about vulnerability. And with that, I'm just gonna jump right into a story, and then we'll break it down.
Okay.
All right. So oh man, it was like a spring or summer day. I was driving down the street in the police car, and broad daylight. I look over to my right, and there was this tall black guy, and he had a knife to this Hispanic guy's neck. He had hospital gloves on, he had a mask on, hood up. This was pre-COVID, so masks weren't a thing, really. If somebody was wearing a mask, especially during the summer, you'd look at them twice, and you'd be wondering, why are they covering up their identity, So I look over, and I see this, and I'm like, holy crap. Never have I seen anything like that. And he was behind the guy, and he had the knife to his neck. And the guy looks over, and he sees me, and he's like, Policia, hands in the air. I was like, holy shit. I'm like, what the? So I'm in rush hour traffic.
Wow.
And there was no way I was going anywhere with the truck. So I flip it in park, and I jump out. And I tried to hit my radio, but the radio wasn't working. It's funny. I tell people this story, and they say, what? How could the radio not work? It's like our cell phones. I mean, there's dead spots, It's nobody's fault. It's just with technology, there's no perfection, right? So I hit the radio, and it's not working. So I'm like, oh, crap. So I'm like, all right, here we go. So I jump out, and, I go for my gun right away because he's got a weapon, right? And then he takes off and starts running. So now I'm chasing him, and I'm like, get the F on the ground, and I'm in a bad neighborhood. And the people that live there, they were watching this all go down, and they start saying, nasty stuff to me as I am saving somebody's life, right? And I'm like, oh, dude, this is a bad situation. So I try my radio again, still not working. So as we're running, he throws something at me, and I don't see it. I see like a shadow of it, and it's coming right at me, and I dodge it, thankfully. And he jumps on the ground. So I got him on the ground with my weapon, gunpoint. And I try my radio again, still not working. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So at this point, my feelings are through the roof. The adrenaline, the tunnel vision's coming in. It was wild. Never experienced anything like this. And I remember hitting my emergency button on my radio. There's this little orange button. You hit it, and it's supposed to take over the whole air. And it didn't work. They thought I was somebody else, so they were checking in on somebody else. So I'm in a really tough position. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go try to handcuff him. And so I put my gun away, and I attempt to handcuff him. And then we're on the ground, and he starts now fighting me while we're on the ground. And he's like flipping around in his hoodie. And now we're face to face, even though I'm on top of him. I'm still trying to get his hands, and now he's standing up. He was much bigger than I was, and I'm like, oh shit, this is a terrible situation. So we get face to face. Now we're on the same level, and we're fighting for. It seemed like 5 minutes, but it was probably less than that. It always seems a lot longer than it really was. But I'm starting to get gassed because we're just going at it. And he goes, well, I'm going to jail anyways. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I'm like,
Wow.
is this dude about to stab me? I don't even know where the knife is at this point. It's a really bad situation. So I push away, and then I go to get my gun out again, and then he runs. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I'm exhausted at this point. So I finally get on the radio as I'm chasing him. It finally works. And they're like, what do you have? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like I'm gasped for air. I'm chasing this guy. He runs into this alley, and he had a friend with him too. The friend took off. Right when I showed up, his friend took off. And he meets up with his friend in this alley. It was a really bad neighborhood. And they disappear. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going in this alley. This is a really bad situation. Nope, no backup yet. I feel like it's been 10, 15 minutes by then, by the time backup even showed up. And I remember just going down on one knee and just like having my gun out, like, all right, like I'm done here. Like this. And this was the first guy that ever got away from me.
Wow.
First person in my career that ever got away. I think at that point I had like 60 people that ran that I caught at that point. And that was the first one. That hurt. That hurt in many ways.
Wow.
But the reason I share this story, he ended up getting caught. DC police showed up. They ended up tracking him. The thing that he threw at me was the knife. I dodged the knife. So that was pretty traumatic for me. I had a tough time with that, and I had to process that. And I mean, I had nightmares. There was just so much to unpack for that, and that was a really tough situation for me. And now I'm good with it. But the reason I share this story is because these things happen, and it's important to have a good support system and to be able to have the courage to share these stories, because it was tough to share the first 20 times I did it, maybe first 50 times. Like, did I have PTSD from it? Probably. I probably did. And I got to go home and face my family and child and all these things, and it's like, man, that's tough. It's tough to come back from that. So especially knowing that the knife whizzed by my head. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's like real fear coming at you, like, yeah, man, I can only imagine. I know I want to dig in a little bit about that moment and the experiences that you felt. But I have a friend too that is a former police officer, and he had PTSD. He was actually he was a cop in Oakland, which very high crime, bad neighborhood. And there was multiple times going home from incidents like this where he was afraid. Like, he was literally like crawling like on the side of his house, going through a passageway that no one could really get it. He only knew how to get into his house because he was afraid that somebody, like, he was afraid. He was always afraid that someone who he arrested, someone who got out of jail is going to come out after him. People that he fought, people that he shot at, like because there was things happening to cops where these criminals were coming back and getting their vengeance. So it's one thing to be vulnerable, which we're talking about today, to talk about these stories and get them out of our system. But I mean, you're bringing this stuff home. How do you disconnect from that? How do you feel safe as a cop in your home when you've had these altercations out in the field?
Yeah, that's a very good question. To be honest, those things, you have to sit with them. You just have to have faith. For me, I'm religious, so I have faith that God will protect me. But at the same time, reality is they could look up your address. They could find where you live. So yeah, it can be scary. You know,
Yeah.
but really, there's not a lot you can do with it. You have. For me, I have a great support system. My family, my cousins are like my brothers and sisters. So I know I can count on them, and my uncles, super close to them. So, we can have these conversations. And the hard part, I think, for cops is the first thought is they're not going to understand what it's like because you can't really understand unless you do it. So, I think that's the biggest kind of misconception at the same time, because it's not so much about somebody understanding. It's more about just sharing your story. Because once you let it out, people can connect with pain, because pain is real, you know, like suffering. These things are things that people experience throughout their life. So they can understand that. So it's not so much that, like, I tell you this story, but you're not an officer, but I do believe that you understand, like, even my tone of voice is different than it usually is, because I'm still here with those feelings. They don't necessarily go away, but I've come to a understanding with them, though, and I'm comfortable with them now, you know? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
man, John, I got a question for you. Thanks, first of all, thanks for sharing all that. It sounds terrifying. I mean, having a knife thrown at your head, that sounds like terrifying. And you see someone holding a knife to someone's throat, and it's like, oh yeah, that's your job to go handle that.
Yeah.
That's like a man, what a profession to be in. After that happens, same community, and think I'm going to bridge the gap in these communities and connect, when it seems like it's like that seems like really hard, and you're like, because it seems like, and let help us understand this, um, like cops living in the neighborhoods they work in, that's not really a thing, right? Is it kind of like, what is the experience like as an officer, um, with that? You know what I mean? Because that seems hard, right? You go into a certain neighborhood and maybe you're like, man, I feel scared. Um, like that seems so vulnerable to try to connect, right? When already just the language of this is a bad neighborhood, that already
Yeah.
puts like a, holy shit, it's bad, and that must mean you're good. Right? If something's bad, then something else is good. Like, how do you work with that? Like, I'm genuinely curious, because I'm like, man, that seems really hard.
As far as, like, if I were to have lived in the neighborhood.
Or just like, like, I think some of the things from like a citizen's perspective, or like, I think a lot of times folks think they're like, oh, cops aren't really from this neighborhood, they live somewhere else and they're just here doing their thing. So I was just curious, is there a part of policing where you're like, we connect with the community and we're in it, or is it like really feels like there's like a bad and a good and a right and wrong, and like an us and them, or like, just like genuinely curious, because that sounds like that would feel vulnerable, to be in a neighborhood where you feel fear and you're like, okay, I'm gonna connect in this neighborhood, or like we said, be that community bridge between the police and the neighborhood. That seems like that could be really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, when I refer to bad, I mean as far as, the level of crime. I don't
Yeah,
look at the people and go, "Oh,
Yeah.
they're bad because they're in this neighborhood." That
but
just might
sometimes
be
people hear that word
circumstantial where,
bad, they feel like
you
that's
know
a bad neighborhood. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, no, I'll see people in bad neighborhoods, and you can tell, you're like, you know where you are?" Like,
Yeah.
this is, and because they'll walk around clueless of where they really are. They get an Airbnb or something, or they just moved into the neighborhood and they make the neighborhood look great, but the crime's pretty bad in that neighborhood. And
Yeah.
that's what these cities have been doing. They've been like rehabilitating the cities. And so there's
totally.
very high crime areas that look great, but on paper, in reality, it's not.
Wow.
It's not. You gotta have your guard up. You gotta know where you are, where your surroundings, you know?
Well, you know, it's just not to cut you off, but it was because I was thinking about that too when I was referencing Oakland as a bad neighborhood. It's not about necessarily good or bad. It's more is it about safety, right? It's
Yeah.
about safe because I live in West Hollywood and I live right on the border of Hollywood, and you know the demographic changes a little bit. Things change when you go a couple more blocks down. But when you think about Beverly Hills, when you go down there, and I'm speaking here, you know, my surroundings, it's not that it's a better neighborhood, just a safer neighborhood.
Right.
So is it fair just to say unsafe versus safe versus
Yeah, and that's what I meant by good and
yeah,
bad. Like, yeah. Because it's not the people. The people are great, honestly. And most of the people appreciate us being there, and they'll walk by and thank you, and I always connect with them. But it's that's what it is. It's
Yeah,
the level of crime,
yeah,
safe and unsafe. Because you could be
totally.
a block away, and it could be a fairly safe neighborhood, but then 2 or 3 blocks down, maybe not so much.
Yeah,
right,
You
totally.
know,
Totally.
so
right.
Man.
yeah, it's tough. I mean, and that's
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's to be able to share the story and realize that you're not in this alone. What you experience is real, and you need that outlet. You need that support system to be able to share. Vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. Weakness is holding it in and trying to say like, oh, I got this. Like, no, because what you're
Yeah.
experiencing is not for the average person.
Right.
Not the people don't experience this stuff on a regular. It's
Totally.
trauma, and
Yeah.
Totally.
you got to be able to open up and share your story. And sometimes it might bring some emotions with it, and that's okay. That's
Yeah.
not, again, that's not weakness. That's
Right.
strength.
How do you feel when you to because I all of us here on this show right now, we understand the power of vulnerability. We understand how scary it is to share some of the shit that's going on that we see and experience. We also know, like when we do it, there's so much freedom, there's so much space that you gain back from unloading all this crazy shit. Um, but for you as an officer, so as John, when you go through something like this, having gone through this particular situation, and I'm sure you've gone through some other situations throughout your career that have been hyper sensitive. Um, when you are vulnerable with these stories, how do you feel like personally when you get some of this stuff out? Like, how do you feel when you're done?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel little emotions. I feel the pain that I once felt. It never really fully goes away. But one thing I do feel, which is on the bright side of it, is I do feel more free.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a hostage to that experience until I share it.
Mm.
And I don't share it to go like, oh, look what I did. I share it to heal, because
Yeah.
healing is like an onion. It just takes, there's layers to it. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And let's be real, most of us, we're always healing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you have to do something, because if you don't, that's when you start abusing, alcohol, drugs, so many things that are just terrible for us. And then the ultimate is suicide. And that's the whole point of a lot of this, really, is to get the story out there, help officers. So that's not even an option. Like, that always bothered me. when you hear of an officer that committed suicide, because that's never an answer. That should never be an answer.
Right.
You got to share your story. You're not tough until you share.
Yeah.
You know.
And John, isn't the suicide is the most dangerous thing that cops face, right? Is that correct? Is that
Yeah. The number
yeah?
one killer of cops before COVID was suicide. Now
Wow.
COVID changed the numbers a little bit, but now that it's not what it was then. Yeah, I can see it going back. You know, the trend is going to come back because the call volume's going up. Call volume is just the amount of calls you get in a day. With the more calls, the more potential stress you have in your life because you're having to go from call to call, and that's why these skills are just so important. You know, you got to know when to get back into the present moment, how to get back into the present moment, how to move on from that last call. You know, how to focus on what's important now. You know,
There you go.
realize that when you do get upset, you know, how to palms down that, you know, using that technique, you know,
Yeah.
and that those are all extremely important. And then when you do experience a traumatic event, how to share it and be vulnerable and be real with somebody, even though you know they're not going to understand. But a
Right.
lot of it's just getting it out and like having people listen, because everyone can connect with pain. Everybody can connect with that,
Yeah.
regardless of if they experience that moment or not. You know, it may not be exact, but no, people know what pain is. People know what suffering
Oh
is.
yeah. And I think,
So
John, that makes a lot of sense. I can, first of all, thank you for sharing this. You are a conscious energy officer, and we're so grateful that you're here sharing and leading with this place.
Totally.
And I've heard several police officers say, and you mentioned it too, like, hey, people don't understand me, right? Which is the truth. Like, if you're not a police officer, how could you understand? You know?
right,
But I think that sentence, right, when a police officer says, oh, you don't understand me, that's true. But then if that's a reason for that officer to not speak and be vulnerable, that's clearly deadly, right?
exactly.
That's clearly fucking deadly. So I think for officers out there, it's okay if people don't understand you. It really is, because they'll still listen and hear you. But more important than, like, say, me understanding you, John, because I may not be in your shoes, I can listen to you. And by you having that space to get stuff off your chest, be vulnerable, you're the one who's getting the help that you need. So just be super aware. Sometimes we have these old belief systems that are stuck, that'll kind of hold us back. And I can see that a lot of police officers are probably like, I'm not going to share this shit because no one understands. And fuck that. I'm just going to keep it to myself. And now I'm trying to cope through a crisis. And now the trauma's building. And now I'm in a perpetual cycle I can't get out of. So I think, John, that's so profound, your willingness to be vulnerable. And that's our 12th principle at Max Conscious, right? Victory to the vulnerable. It is profoundly victorious when you allow yourself to be vulnerable. It is the counter to suicide, like a willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to feel your feelings and share is a direct counter. And I'm saying that not even in terms of police officers. I've worked with the U.S. Navy. And with the U.S. Navy, guess what they call me for? People are committing suicide. And they were like,
Yeah,
how the fuck do we deal with this? And I was like, that, and all we worked on was being vulnerable. That if they felt safe to be vulnerable, they could talk about their experience and then get help that they need. So it came from leadership as well. Like, I was working with admirals and they had to learn to be vulnerable to help the sailors they were leading be vulnerable. John, what is that experience like for you? Like, feeling like you have a supportive leadership group, or how was in general, how was vulnerability kind of looked at with police officers?
Ooh. Well,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say all departments in general, because I've seen multiple departments. It's something we need to work on,
Okay.
you know, and it's no fault of their own. This is history, right? Policing goes way back, and so we only learn in this line of work when things happen, right? We learn as we go, and this is a great moment for the leaders, you know, of this country to understand this concept, because it's imperative if we want officers to stop hurting themselves And we want healthy officers on the street. We want to boost morale. We want a better workplace. We want better bond with the community. You know, we want less force. They need to understand this concept, and they will, because we will help them. You know, that's why we're doing this. That's the whole reason, to build that bridge and to reduce suicide and all those things that I said, because it's imperative. It needs to happen. So, and they'll hear us. You know, they'll hear us.
Yeah.
But we have work to do. But that's why it's one of our skills, because we're not going to teach them 2 + 2. This is high level stuff that they can use at home, with their children, on the job, any which way you go. Like, this is strength. So yeah, it's something we need to work on for sure.
Whew, that's why I think it's so important to put that word victory in front of vulnerable, because it gives you that proper perspective of, I mean, truthfully, when I was working with the US Navy, I was like, I can only fucking call you tough if you're willing to be vulnerable, or else I'm gonna fucking call you soft. And they were like, yeah, but they kind of had a problem. But then they were like, I'm like, that's the truth though. And so those terms helped them, right? Because they were like, we need to come off tough here. And I was like, no problem. Being vulnerable is way fucking tougher than avoiding vulnerability. And it was like, that wasn't the tough they were expecting, but then they realized, oh shit, that is tough. Like, if I'm willing to be vulnerable, as opposed to not willing to be vulnerable, the one who's willing to be vulnerable is way tougher, right? Way more expansive. And that's a crazy concept, because I think not only for police officers, the Navy, for professional athletes that I work with, it's the same shit. Like, people are like, vulnerability, fuck that. Like, that really, they'll be like, fuck that. And then I say, hey, how's that working out for you? And they're like, fucking terrible. You know what I mean? So then they're caught in a trap. They're like, what I'm doing is fucking terrible, but being vulnerable sounds even scarier.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's really important to model this as like really profound. And that, like, this, like, doing it, you will experience a victory that is so profound, you know, and you will free yourself. It's very liberating. If you don't allow yourself to feel vulnerable, it's like being trapped. It's like being, you know, held in bondage. You're limiting yourself as a human. And I think that's why with the Navy and with police officers, we see so many instances with suicide, because if you limit your humanness, it's almost unbearable to be human after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's unbearable. If you're like, I'm not going to allow myself to feel a normal human feeling, then being human is going to be really fucking hard.
Yeah.
You know, and then people go and they're out and they check out, you know? So I
Yeah,
think
and I
this
think-
process that we have in Max Conscious to create a pathway. Yeah. No, I was just going to say, the things they love is that we have a process, that we have, you know, like, here's a process to follow. Here's an order. Here's a system. You know what I mean? Here's our 16 weeks where we teach you a whole system. And a lot of times on this show, we're just talking about the first 4, right? What's important now, learning to be present, how to bounce back to the present with next play speed, and then choosing your response with palms down. You know, victory to the vulnerable is very advanced, right? That's a very advanced skill, but I believe so highly in police officers. And I think police officers are some of the most intelligent people in the world. And they have to function at such a high level, doing so much processing in real time, that I think it's important to really be of service to police officers, that we have a process, you know, that works. And John, you're out there living it, man. You're really, really living it. And it's really great to see, because I know one of the things that helps people is they need to see someone else doing it, you know? They're like, does this fucking work? Like, who the fuck else is doing this?
Yeah.
You know? And sometimes if you can't see someone else doing it, you're like, well, I'm not going to do that shit. You know? So,
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's, you know, and that's why, to piggyback off that, that's why all these skills are important, because if you don't understand what's important now and controlling what you can control and living in the present moment, it's going to be very difficult for you to share your vulnerabilities, because you're going to go back to that. And the only moment that matters is right now, this very moment. This is the only moment we can control. So if our mind is not in the present moment and we're in the past, guess what? We're going to be depressed. right? I can't go back and change what happened.
Yeah.
That is what happened. That's reality. That's life. All I can do is share my story, but know that, yes, I shared that story, but I'm here now. And this is the best place to be. This is the most powerful place. This is the moment, right?
It's where you're most alive, man.
Yeah.
You know?
This is the only moment. So this is the greatest moment right now. Not
Yeah.
tomorrow, not yesterday, right now. That's it.
You know, I do want to say this real quick before we close here, but you know, when we talk about being vulnerable, to me at least, there's two sides of it. Meaning, there's when you get into the arena, when you're willing to show up. So, like doing your job as a police officer, you're showing up in the moment, being vulnerable with your training, being vulnerable in trusting yourself. Right? I call it being vulnerable with your play. And then there's also, then you have that experience, and then there's the vulnerability of sharing it, right?
Yeah.
Good or bad. So there is a couple different sides of vulnerability. Yes, vulnerability is cracking up in your chest and sharing your story, but it's also too showing up when shit's going bad, right? Or when you're maybe in a moment's notice, you're kind of second guessing yourself, but you go back into your trust. And what's important right now is trust my shit and let's show up. And that's vulnerability with your play, with your performance.
Yeah. Yeah. And that ties into other skills, and we can go over that another day, but
Yeah.
magic with the math is a perfect example of that. We will get out of this. I'm not going to focus on getting out of it. I'm going to sit here and process these feelings. I'm going to sit with these feelings.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to shut it out. I'm here. I'm with it. It's not the most comfortable feeling, but the only way for me to get past this is to be present in this moment and process them and share it, and to be able to get that off my chest and not run to the outcomes of like, oh wait, I just want to be happy. Like, no, that's not reality. We are all living this human experience. In the end of the day, officer or not, we're human beings. So that's why vulnerability is a major player in this career.
It is, man. 100%.
Well, way to go, man. It's been a great show. And just to kind of help everyone make it practical who's listening. So a couple key points. Victory goes to those willing to express their vulnerability, right? We're not talking about, hey, go to a 10th story building and jump off and we'll see if you live. Like, no, that's real. Like, you're in fucking danger, right? In this case, vulnerability is John expressing his feelings. John not keeping the stuff to himself and bottling it up and kind of, shutting it down. It's willingness to share it. And so I think that's a great start for officers out there to consider is sharing. And even if someone is not a cop, that's okay, because that's an old story that, oh, they're not a cop, so I can't share.
Right.
Let me go drink by myself. That's fucking tragic right there, right? That's like mental health 20 years ago. They were like, oh, Graham, mental health is for pussies. And I was like, wow, like, you're fucking insane. You know what I mean? And I'm watching someone break down because they're thinking it's soft and they refuse to do the work, and they're going to die like alone and by themselves, So I think it's important for everyone out there to start with looking at that belief system that says, I'm not allowed to go say this and no one gets me, and go, you know what? Fuck that. I am going to say something and I'm going to put it out there because this is super important for me. And what you'll notice is, like, John, I'm not a cop, but me and you work great together. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? Like, I can completely listen to you. Do I have a badge and a gun on? No. And I'm never going to. And that's okay, because you're still a human and I'm a human. You know what I mean? Like, you're a human being choosing to be a cop. I'm a human being choosing to be a mental coach. But we have a bottom line connection, which is humanness. And all of us need to express that. So thank you for that, John. I want to encourage everyone out there to just try it. Give it a try. Don't suffer in silence. Suffering in silence is the absolute worst thing we can do. So go be vulnerable, and go test what we're saying. Let's see what these fucking crazy three guys are talking about. Let's go see if me expressing my feelings is fucking real. And in general, like, I work with a ton of men. I work with a ton of women. This is in general. In general, I've noticed men are more scared to be vulnerable. Now, that's a stereotype, but I've noticed it. And so just something to be aware of. And I've noticed with women that they'll come to me and be like, can you help my husband or help my son or help my father? Can you help them fucking learn to be vulnerable? So it'll be the people around them that care really a lot about them and see this person suffering, and they'll come to me and be like, can you help them? Because they're like, fuck being vulnerable. No one gets it. And they can tell they're headed for a really dark place. So, there's people that care about you. Know that. We're here at Max Conscious for all those listening. Like, reach out to us, connect with us. We're here for this. And victory to the vulnerable is real. Like, this isn't make-believe shit. Like, it's really real. It's not even like a belief. It's fucking real. It's like if you go in and lift weights and you're like, if my muscles burn, and your muscles are going to grow later, you're like, yeah, that's how it works. Like, that's how the whole system works. If you're willing to express your feelings and be vulnerable, you're going to fucking heal and get better. Period.
Yeah.
That's how it works. That's not a belief system. That's just how it works,
And one more thing before we wrap it up. What I did was I got a counselor. Get somebody that you trust. Speak to someone that you trust. Worst case, you get a counselor and it doesn't work out. They keep their mouth shut. They have to, right? Unless you're a danger to yourself. But either way, they'll get you the help that you need. And, you could always follow me on Instagram, the Conscious Energy Officer on Instagram. If you want to talk, send a message. I'm here for it. Just, reach out.
Good.
Absolutely.
Well, great job, y'all. Another great show. Victory to the vulnerable. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about vulnerability often. I think this is going to come up in a lot of our talks. I think this is a really big deal. I think it's a really big deal.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Well,
on that note, thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah. Have a great weekend. Hey, if there's an opportunity for you to be vulnerable and share your story, whether that's your friend, your significant other, your partner, your peer, man, try it on. Crack open your chest and try it on. It's a real thing and it's going to help you. And more on this later, because we're going to be talking about this topic a lot on this show.
Yep.
So everyone have a great weekend.
That's right.
Stay present.
Yeah. Happy Halloween.
All right, y'all. Have a great weekend. Great job.